product strategy, manufacturing, and quality. And yeah, this is going to be a fun topic. We kind of jam these together, but they're all, I think, critically interrelated and important to consider as a whole. So I'm really excited to dive into this and talk to our panelists today. This will be in the hour and a half format. So we'll do the first hour here live streamed, and then we'll do a final 30-minute session with just the cohort. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our panelists for today. So we have Bindya Dunakela, I'm sorry, Bindya Donakula at Illumina, Eric Mayton at Cirillo, Calvin Liu at 421 Advisory, and Shri Menon from Ecolab. I'm going to give each of you a minute to introduce yourself, but yeah, please tell us kind of, who you are, a little bit of your background, and maybe your initial thoughts on product strategy, manufacturing, quality. And Bindya, I'd love to hear from you to start us off.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Bindya Danikula. I'm a senior director at Illumina. Um, I have been leading the next generation sequencing platforms. I guess my focus is how do I make complex products, take it from innovation all the way through making it market ready. And the thing that excites me the most is putting the right tools in place that allows us to identify the risks sooner and then de-risk them along the way. And ensuring while we are doing all of this that the product is truly ready to market when we get out from there. The pieces that have been important is from the very beginning, which is the definition of the product itself. Are you building the right product? And then the second part is, are you building the product right? So this is your product development and manufacturing readiness. And then the last piece is, are you launching the product right? So this is where you're getting your commercial org and everybody ready to scale the product and get it out the door. So today, I'm really excited to share my perspective on what it truly takes to get the product ready to market, and hear from you guys.
Thanks, Bindya. And just curious, what was your path to your current role at Illumina?
So I have been in biotech for 20 plus years at this point. Started with Zeiss, working on the retinal scanning devices, and then went to a startup for a real-time PCR device, and then from there to Illumina, and worked on 7 different Illumina NPI products, and launched the NovaSeq X as the instrument design lead. And now I'm leading the next generation sequencing platform. So a lot of exciting work, never a repetition, never been boring. But yeah, it's been an amazing ride so far.
All right. Thanks, Bindya. And Eric.
Hey guys, sorry, my internet cut out there for a second. So I'll wing it here to get started. Eric Mayton, CEO of Cirillo. We were a 2024 BTI cohort company. Cirillo manufactures miniaturized automation and detection devices, including specialized software and consumables. We're located in Charlottesville, Virginia. I've been the CEO here for almost 6 years, leading from, initial early stage kind of beta product all throughout, multiple iterations across the life cycle of hardware, software, consumables. And Cirillo was just recently acquired by Hamilton Company. So now we are part of a much larger organization. So happy to chat with you guys today.
All right. Thanks, Eric, and good to see you. Calvin.
Hey, my name's Kelvin Liu. I'm currently on a little mini retirement, doing a lot of business advising, little angel investing, little VC investing. Prior to this, I had a small genomics startup that I sold to PacBio, so another sequencing company. While I was at PacBio, I led a lot of their application development. And so my background is, been in genomics and omics space for about 10 to 15 years now, and making lots of kits, selling lots of kits. And so when I started Circulomics, we had a cool little technology, and then we had to transform that into a product, and then we had to manufacture and distribute that product. So we sold products in, to 50 to 100 countries all around the world that we shipped. And so, I had a great technical team. They did all the technical work, and I spent most of my time kind of thinking about, hey, what product is the right one? How do we make that at profit, since we were bootstrapped, and so we had to be profitable from day one. And so I think that's pretty core part of the business you got to figure out is, how you go from good technology to good product to a profitable company. And so hopefully we can help you guys do that today.
Thanks, Calvin. And Shri.
Hey everyone, I'm Srijit. I head the global bioprocessing R&D division at Ecolab, which is part of their life sciences business. Ecolab is a 100-year-old organization playing in different markets. Within the bioprocessing space, we design, develop new purification resins that's used for purifying biologics. And my background, I'm a chemist by training, been in the life sciences industry for 12 plus years, always been involved in new product innovation and then taking that from innovation all the way to commercialization. And as Bindya and some of my other panelists highlighted, really excited to be part of this panel session because there are key steps that we all need to consider as we go through translating our product to a commercial success. So excited to discuss and share some of our thoughts.
All right, thanks, Shri. So to kind of kick this off, and we'll start obviously with the manufacturing, the product strategy side of things. That's where we'll start. But as you're thinking about growing from your initial proof of concept, early prototypes to functional external prototypes that are going to be actually in customers' hands, I think that's a lot of products crossing that chasm here. What should they be considering and sort of putting into that initial product strategy? And Bindya, maybe you could kick us off with this one.
I think that is the key question when you're designing a product is, are you designing the right one? And there are several ways you can collect the information, voice of customers, conjoint studies, one-on-one with your key customers, or even the market space to understand what is the problem statement that you're trying to solve and what is the value proposition when you provide a solution for it. It should never start with, I have a technology, so let me make a product from it. It should start with a need. And that need needs to be quantified into value proposition. And once that is done correctly, then you need to think about how do I ensure I'm building the right product, right? So at that point, you have to think about what is my prototype? How do I get into my customer's hands? And how do I get the validation saying that this is still the right product that I'm building? So I believe if we start with that, it's not only ensures that you're building the right product, but by the time you get to launch after like 2, 3, 5 years of investment, you know that you're going to be a commercial success when you come out to the back end of it.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Bindya. So Shri, how do you know, when you're kind of working on these products, how do you know that it's actually like doing that job for the customers? How do you know that it's getting, meeting those needs?
Yep. No, just following through on what Bindya pointed out, right? It all starts with that problem statement and defining whether your technology or your product feeds into solving that problem statement. Now, you might solve it in different ways, right? That's how competition and things come about. Identifying where is your value proposition in problem solving that, right? Defining that clearly, and then the next step would be putting the right metrics on measuring whether you are whether you can verify those value propositions through your own internal designing of experiments, voice of customers, and market input that you gather, right? These can be achieved by reaching out into the market, understanding what's already been a problem statement out there, and then bringing that back in-house. To targeting specific customers where you have seen that this is a problem that persists, because there would be more excitement and energy for them to share that problem with you and what they have faced, so that you can go back and engineer the right type of experiments that will help you verify that you're solving that problem. And once you have defined that and you have enough confidence in that data, you're able to engage with these partners to go and validate some of these to further learn on how your prototype is behaving in a real environment. So.
She said something interesting at the beginning, which was we haven't talked about this a lot. We don't talk about this a lot, but it's your value proposition or even your unique value proposition. Can you talk a little more about that and maybe share some examples of maybe what you have had or think of in terms of like maybe your or other value propositions?
Sure, right. Usually it boils down to a couple of things, right? One is to do with processing of use of this product to improve time for your customers, right? Getting their work done faster. Second piece is being able to do that cheaper. Two fundamental needs of your customers. And third is, depending on what the technical problem might be, how much differentiation can you get from what the current gold standard might be there today, or this might be a completely novel problem you're trying to solve. So if you can address these three pillars for your customers, I think that is where you can start defining the value proposition for your customers.
Thanks, Sri. Calvin, you said you bootstrapped your company, which is always very impressive to me. But you also can't be everything to everybody. So how do you think in terms of like your early products and how do you how do you pick those right feature sets? How do you know what's good enough? How do you think through that?
I think that's it's super hard, right? So maybe instead of giving lectures, I can share a couple stories, right? Where things went different ways. I remember when we launched our first product, we engineered that thing to death, So we picked, hey, our customers will probably like to process X sample, Y sample, Z sample. It needs to be able to hit this sequencing performance. It needs to do this sample set. If we had a set of 10 samples that we wanted to mimic what customers would do. We engineered that thing to death because we were afraid it was our first product and we were afraid it would go out and it would be messy, right? And so we wanted the first product to come out beautiful, right? And so I think we probably could, in retrospect, we could have probably launched that, 6 months earlier, or maybe even a year earlier. But the market that we were in was the long read market. And when we launched that product in 2015, it was super nascent, right? And so we might not have had customers, even if we came out a year earlier, right? And it just so happened that the time that we came out, it ended up being perfect, right? And given that we were grant funded, we didn't have a lot of pressure on time. And so, things ended up okay. But I remember my team constantly badgering me, when are you going to launch this? When are you going to launch this? I was like, hey, let's add a couple more sample sets on. Let's make sure it works really good. Let's repeat this a few more times because I wanted that first product launch to be perfect. And then we had another product that we were doing for size selection. If you do DNA sequencing, sometimes you want DNA of a specific size. And so we had a size selection product that was supposed to be this. And then we had an early customer that we beta tested that we knew really well. We beta tested part of that product with them, right? Once they tested it, they liked just the first half. And they're like, you don't have to do both steps. You could just do the first step and it works super well. And then we never thought of launching the first step. So we thought the first part of it was kind of hokey. It was kind of half the thing. But then they pushed us. They were like one of the leaders in the field. They pushed us to launch it. They brought in on board one of another sequencing company that we're working closely with, and it became a hit product, right? And so that was one thing where we thought it was way raw, and we sent them a beta thing, and then they took half of that beta thing, and they were the ones. The market told us this is going to be a wonderful product, and they were right, right? So I think there can be a lot of different situations where sometimes you work with those early customers, and they tell you something that you don't know. And that's why a lot of that beta thing is we find super valuable, right? To be able to build a collection of 10 or 20 trusted customers that you can work with that can help together with you, grow markets and build products together.
That's really interesting. On the first story where you talked about spending so much time on the engineering, if you were to do that over again, would you be sure to sort of launch earlier? Or do you think you did it the right way for where you were?
I think I'd probably leave it. I think I'd probably leave it because the product worked incredibly well. And then that product, it's still selling today. And I don't think it's ever been updated, right?
Oh wow.
And the chemistry didn't update. Like that product became like the core of our entire portfolio that we built lots of things, widgets around and additions to. And so I think, because it was the central product, I think, I probably wouldn't change anything, right? It was so, we just, we did such a good job, we spent so much time on it.
I've heard it said that first-time founders focus on product and the second-time founders focus on channels. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I think we focus on everything all at the same time, luckily.
yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Eric, let's bring it over to you. You're very close to this right now. You're in the middle of it. How do you think through your product development and customer interactions, and how do you kind of handle those engagements to figure out the use of your products?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as a startup, so as a former cohort company, you're limited in your amount of capital and your amount of time. And so you can't typically wait for perfect, right? Like you need to get product in user hands. Um, you know, Importantly, because you can't, you're sitting in your chair wherever you are, Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, you don't know what the actual end user experience is going to be like until they start using it, right? You can project any way that you want, but until you actually have that market feedback from an actual user, you don't really have anything other than assumptions and projections. And so getting it in that end user hand as quickly as possible is vitally important. So, our hardware product is currently on is the generation 3 or generation 4. We wanted to make sure at each generation that it's getting out to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, so we can get that user feedback. Because initial assumptions for us were we weren't really going to make much of a market impact until we got to generation 3. But generation 1 and 2 took off, right? And it met a specific user need that no other product could. I'm like, okay, well, that's great. And we all, always assumed that by the time we got to generation 3, we would sunset generations, 1 and 2. We can't. The market won't let us, even if we wanted to. It meets a user need so well that it's a nice little growing business. So, from our perspective, especially as someone who's constantly looking for funding, right? You have to have external validation points and not assumptions. So you need to get that product out into real user hands, get that real user feedback. Voice of the customer is good enough to start building your product requirements, but actually having publications that users are using your products, there's nothing quite like that. And that really is what moves the needle from a funding and everything else in the market.
So Eric, when you were going between your generations, did you update or did your user specifications or your product strategy change, or was this something you mapped out ahead of time and were like boom, 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 or did you organically sort of grow and adapt as you learned more and evolved in the market? And yeah, what was your sort of thinking there?
It was always, roadmap on a product, kind of a product roadmap from Gen 1 through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all those other things, right? You kind of know in our space what you want the end product to be. And you're getting from iteration 1 to iteration 2 to iteration 3 and getting the feedback at each iteration on what works and what doesn't, right? Um, just that whole agile product development and software development, mentality of fail fast, right?
Right. But you
Getting
you
out in
said
user
your
hands.
first product, your customers won't let you stop making them. Are they
No.
solving different needs for customers then between these product
Yeah.
types?
Well, I think it's we didn't realize how big that need was in the marketplace. Like the market told us, it's like, oh wow, this is actually a massive unmet need in the market. We, we thought by the time we got to generation 3, we could, you know, sunset this because there's a much bigger market out there for generation 3, which is true. But generation, 1 and 2 is meeting a need in such a specific way for that user base that they just want it more and more and more. So
Okay. Well, let's move on to kind of as you're prototyping. You're prototyping. Oftentimes, we're prototyping both the product and the business itself, and these go hand in hand. So, I'd like to kind of learn more about how you prototype the entire business stack, including the customers, the buying, deploying, troubleshooting, logistics, testing, validation, verification, manufacturing, all these things. Shri, would you mind kicking us off on this?
Sure, yeah. I mean, from when you start thinking about prototyping either your product or the business part, I think identifying the right personas at your customer end is very important, and you begin that with, because the buyer, the user, uh, they're going to be different people at that customer base, right? So what a buyer might seek when you're going to with the product might be different to what the user might seek. So understanding the different profiles within your customer is probably the very first important piece that you have to identify, starting with the user, understanding what are their technical challenges that your product is going to solve, putting your prototype, even if it's not the perfect prototype, in front of them on how it solves the problem will be key. From a buyer standpoint, from a quality standpoint, regulatory standpoint, you need to make sure you have those people in the room when you are trying to understand, is there an appetite for them to switch to this new product technology, and what would it take for them to want to adopt these technologies. And that's where things around pricing, things around the type of quality documentation you need to support them with, or the regulatory questions that they need assessment with, is what you can start planning in as you kind of get feedback on how your prototype is performing. So that, say if the feedback on the prototype is very promising and they want to move forward with maybe moving to a more commercial version of this, you already have things in action or motion addressing some of the needs of the other stakeholders that make the decision of adopting this and transforming that into a commercial product opportunity.
Thanks, Sri. Bindya, do you feel like do you agree with Sri? And do you feel like there may be differences between maybe larger and smaller businesses, or things that you're sort of take for granted or have to consider based on that positioning?
I think I don't know if it changes that much if it's a large or a smaller corporation in the thought process, because the fundamentals are same, right? It's all about what is the customer base you're going behind, what is the problem statement you're trying to solve, and then how do you devise the prototype that allows you to get that initial learnings from a customer. So one of my main experiences is, if you have 5 different type of customer types you're going behind and you're trying to make the product work for every one of those, it's a difficult challenge, right? And in the process, you might not be able to achieve the North Star end product that you're trying to put together. So in the initial phases, understanding what is the biggest ROI, how are you going to prioritize, and then getting the product into the customer hand, and that initial prototype, designing it in a way that you're not over engineering it and trying to make it perfect for everybody, but rather prioritize those initial customers you want the feedback from, and being nimble enough. And this is a bigger challenge for bigger organizations, where being nimble to change a product definition, because what you thought was the right definition going out into the customer's hand might not be what they're really looking for. And being able to take that feedback and pivot is really going to be what makes or breaks that product. Because a lot of times there's some cost in development and you don't want to make certain changes. But if you do not get the right product definition feedback and make these changes, I think the commercial success will struggle.
Thanks, Bindya. I was going to ask, I mean, of course, without naming any names or specifics, but do you have any sort of stories or case studies that you've experienced where this has like affected you and there's been a change enacted?
Yeah. So when I was in my startup, right, and we would get trying to get our customers, touch or play with the product and provide the feedback. We first started with, here is a vision of phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, beautifully written down in a document, and we were marching towards it. And when we got into the phase 2 part of the product, we were like, is this meeting the need? And the customer's feedback was, no, 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 this is exactly what I'm not looking for. And the phase 1, a simple change to that definition was plenty for them to achieve the goal, versus our phase 2, which was very tangential in a different direction, right? We thought it was disruptive and revolutionary and was going to push the boundaries, but a much more simplified answer is what they were looking for. And because of hearing that feedback, I guess first it was not something we anticipated. So it's a little bit of internalizing that feedback. But from there, the pivot was one of the best things we did. Once we pivoted from there, the product became simpler. We were able to accelerate the development aspect and the manufacturing scalability for it. And from there, make it a commercial product that we can get out the door sooner.
Thanks, Bindya. Kelvin, one of the things we talked about in our prep session, which I'd love to have you maybe go a little more into, is when you think about customer discovery and, I think mistakes that a lot of teams make around the world, not just biotools companies, but just like, asking the customer like, hey, this is what I'm making. Would you buy it? And people are like, yeah, that looks great. I love that. Like, tell me more. And you're like, yes, that's a buying signal. Um, but reality is not so simple or straightforward, I think. So how do you go about getting real, honest, authentic feedback instead of just the, hey, attaboy, that looks great. We love that.
So I can share two stories. So like the one I touched on earlier was with that size selection product, right? And so that first customer tested it. They were the nanopore group at UCS Santa Cruz. They became one of our best collaborators. They loved it, and then immediately they just kept telling all the collaborators, "This like, hey, this would work great in this product, and this would work great in this project." And then they went to go talk to Oxford Nanopore, who we collaborated a lot with at the time. And then so like within like a couple of weeks, it just spread like wildfire, right? Everybody wanted to buy it, and everyone wanted it. And so the signal was that everyone came knocking on our door saying, "Hey, we want to buy it. We heard about this thing. We want to buy it." On the flip side, we had a kit for plant extraction that we never actually launched, right? And we beta tested it many, many times. It worked pretty well. Like it worked on a lot of plants, worked pretty well, and we beta tested it many different times with customers. And the customers always tested, "Oh yeah, it works great. Compared to our current extraction, it works great. The sequence looks really good as expected," but they never asked to buy it, right? And so the first time we were like, "Oh, yeah, it worked great. The sequencers look good. They got good extraction results, great sequencers, great assembly. So it looks great. Okay, yeah, we should." And then they're like, they never asked to buy it. And then we know, okay, let's sit on this. And 6 months later, we try it again. And every time we try it, we get the same results, right? And so like that was where the customer was. I think that they're being honest, but also polite, right? And it was good, but not good enough to actually change their existing behavior, right? And so that's a case where we kind of had to read between the lines, right? And so I think sometimes the customers, they may say one thing, but they will act with their pocketbooks. Like when something is good, and when you find that right fit, they will come knocking down your door trying to get it, right? And that's when that you hit the nail on the head.
And were you able, I'm sorry, were you ever able to get like a straight answer from your customer prospects on that challenge?
I think they're kind of like, I don't know, personally, the way I internalize in the mind is they're kind of like investors, right? Once you've done a lot of pitching, you'll find that most investors are also pretty nice, right? They won't tell you, "No, this sucks." They'll kind of say, "Oh yeah, let's revisit this in 6 months," right? That soft yes you learn is actually a no, right? And so I've learned that with customers are often like that too. A soft yes often means a no, and then a resounding yes that's the real yes.
Awesome. All right. Eric, I want to come back to you. And, sometimes even getting these conversations in the first place can be hard and challenging. I worked with a guy who was a former J&J sales guy in my company. And he was like, after a few weeks, he was like, "Man, this is tough. When I was at J&J, I walked in and I was like, I'm with J&J and I got a meeting." He's like, "Nobody knows who you are. I'm not getting meetings." Um, how do you go about kind of initiating these conversations with the right people in your past Cirillo? I mean, you're still doing it, but of course. But how do you go about that, Eric?
I mean, it's one of the most difficult things, right? Because you have no brand recognition, as Jim's alluding to, right? And you're selling them this new product that they've never heard of, right? Especially if you're trying to talk to someone like an Illumina or J&J or anywhere else where you're trying to sell into these companies, and you've got these you're competing against very established groups, right? With brand recognition that you can come in and say, "I'm with Agilent," or "I'm with whatever," right? PacBio, and they get the meetings just like that. Um, you really have to view it much more as a relationship management and relationship building exercise, in my opinion, right? Um, one of the things that we talked about in the pre-meeting was there's this assumption that you only get one opportunity with these folks, and to some degree that is true. But what that one opportunity is it's one opportunity to make a good impression, right? And that's why I continue to come back to get your product out there in actual user hands, because you're never going to see every edge case that the product may or may not work for, right? Like you may think that you've built, end-to-end perfect solution. It's going to work plug and play seamlessly. And I can guarantee you didn't plan for this modification that the end user made into their software that completely disrupts your API, right? And so now that user experience is really poor, and that relationship has a lot of work to do, right? And so the way I always go about it, or I recommend after learnings, right, getting out there, trying it out, whether it was like first shipping demo units, via UPS with a user guide that is step 1 through 10, very easy, realizing that doesn't work very well. We just, we get on the plane and we go to the user and we do the install, and, we talk to them. And there's no way your product is going to be perfect from day one for these users as a start, right? Like if you've got all the money in the world and you've had 4 years to put into product development, it should be pretty good to finish by the time you get to the end user. But as a cohort company here, you're going to have to get out there really quickly and build those relationships. If it doesn't work the first time, showing them that your understanding of, oh, well, that's probably what happened here. Let me go back and do this little bug correction really quickly. You're able to do it on the fly in 5 seconds, and it works again. Whereas, you'd have to do 2 hours of Zoom meetings and 10 different emails back and forth to get to the same solution. It's the relationship building, the trust, and the intangible things that you can't see by email or Zoom, right? Like the body language that you're seeing in that room, from that end user of delight or disappointment, in being able to take it, seriously, and then adapt to that. So.
That's interesting, Eric. So in terms of your product, you guys are doing on-site install support training for every unit or every new customer with the unit?
No, not at all. But
No.
with once it's to a level that we've tested in, it's got dozens and dozens of user feedback. It's pretty easy to send it out. And
So
do,
early on, you're doing that to get the feedback, make sure it's smooth, and then once you're confident.
Exactly. Once you've got those, once you've gotten that feedback from the beta users and everyone else, right? And you're really confident you've built it to meet every user need, then it's put in a box and ship it to South Africa with an instruction manual. So.
All right. Are you in South Africa?
Yeah, we've got users there.
Awesome.
We've got users in 35 different countries. So we definitely can't do that with 8 people on staff,
Incredible. All right. Well, let's transition here, unless anybody else has any final comments on strategy. Let's switch over to quality and traceability as a small company. And I think this is, if you haven't worked in it before, this is probably a big unknown question mark box. It's expensive. We've heard of like ISO 9001, ISO 1345. We heard of GMP, GLP, GXP, GCP. They go on and on and on. And I think that, for an early stage company that's kind of putting their initial systems and processes in place, quality is probably something that should be considered and looked at. But the question is, at what level and when is the right time to invest? And is it need to be externally driven or also internally driven? And again, Shri, maybe would you mind kicking us off on this one?
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I mean, as I pointed out, right, when you're getting into the early beta testing, evaluation with your customers, it's good to feel the pulse on if this was to be a successful product, what are some of the things that need to be true? if they were to buy this commercially from you? That is when a lot of these quality regulatory related questions start popping up. And I've had personal experiences in my previous life where, sometimes you overlook that because you're so excited that the results are positive, and you're looking to move this forward. And you get to a certain stage of development until you realize when their procurement or quality person puts an email saying, hey, can I have XYZ documentation of your how well you control your raw material supply, how well you control your process parameters to design and engineer your products. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I missed something. And then you have to circle back. And then that's a lot of waste. You lose a lot of time because it's not something that is sometimes directly in your control, where you need a lot of other cross-functional groups to bring that information back to you before you can provide that. So I think it's very important that you bake that in as part of your learning journey when you're doing these beta testing, to collect, if possible, those insights from those key stakeholders at your customers end, who can talk about, if this was successful, what are the common criterias that we use, or what are the common documentation we need for you guys to provide us with to ensure that your product meets the quality standards by which we are able to source and utilize them for our applications. So I think that's an important thing to remember. Even if you don't have capabilities to have that in house, you might be scaling this with a third party external contract manufacturing company where you might look to commercialize this product. It also helps you vet if those partners of yours are able to provide these kind of support documentation when you transition from a prototype to a commercial manufacturing setup.
I love that. So you're baking that into your discovery process at the very
Yes.
beginning.
Because it helps you save a lot of time. And because at the end of the day, you want to get to your product into the market faster. And these are some of the roadblocks that delay its ability to be commercialized. So having that insight early definitely helps support speed up some of those.
Yeah, well, maybe we could just go around real quick. I'd love to hear from each of you just what parts of quality you felt were most important for your company that you implemented. Probably nobody starts with the whole thing. You do it in phases and stages, but love to hear kind of where you think the value is in quality, because obviously too much can be overburdensome on the paperwork and the reporting and the tracking and things, but too little also has probably significant business risks long term. So. Maybe Kelvin?
Yeah. When I think about quality, I like to think about like what the purpose of that system is, right? And the purpose of the system is really to ensure that you put out a product that performs well, right? Day after day after day. Like it's in the name. You have to put out a quality product, right? And so when you think about that, just following an ISO certified process or being ISO certified doesn't necessarily ensure that you're going to put out a quality product. There are tons of big companies that put out products that don't perform well, that underperform, not reliable, some have varying, some units work, some don't, and so just having that quality stamp or following a certain process without actually thinking about underlying challenges or the reason the technical challenges that could lead to quality issues doesn't ensure success, right? And on the flip side, right, just because you don't have a formal quality standard, like just because you're not formally trained or don't have a CGMP, if it's not infringed under specific quality guidelines, doesn't mean you can't put out a quality product, right? And so like in our early days, my company was bootstrapped. We hired a bunch of scientists. We were all PhD scientists. None of us had really had much commercial experience, right? And so we didn't have any formal training. Like we didn't know what product requirements were. We didn't know what a design history file was. We didn't follow have a formal validation stage, formal transfer stage, right? But we did many of those things informally, right, under different names, right? So, for example, we would always QC every lot of incoming material from all of our manufacturers, right? We didn't just rely on their specs. We QC'd all of them, right? We would every time before launch, we would manufacture three lots of things, make sure they all perform the same, and then we would sell the third lot, right? We'd have lot trackers and SOPs so that we could sign off on every little step, right? We had PowerPoint files that we used to memorialize every single major design decision that we made in the data, right? We'd had large logs of every sequencing run we've ever done, every experiment we ever did, and why we did those experiments, right? And so, all of our products were fully traceable. All like, we found, hey, this lot went bad. We could find exactly where every little bit and piece of material is because we made our own Access database to track all of it. Right? And so, because we couldn't afford the fancy software. We didn't know what the fancy software was called, but we built databases and processes internally to track all those things that we thought were important, right? So that we could get, hey, if something went wrong with this lot of material, we could track, oh, this is the operator that made it. Oh, this is what they measured every single time, right? And so we had systems that fulfilled those needs, but not necessarily by that same name, right? And then we, before we even got acquired, we had customers that were using our products in LDTs of their own, right? And so even though we didn't have any formal requirements, the products performed well enough that they could downstream take those through their processes, right? And so I think that's where you have to think about quality systems in terms of what their goal is, and then what your customers need at the end of the day, right? Do they need you to be CGMP or ISO certified, or is it not necessary for your business need, right? And so in our area, where a lot of our customers, are developing their own LDTs or their own tests, us being RUO and not having any formal thing was just fine, right? Because as you pull on those things, they definitely add a lot of, they have value, but they definitely add a lot of time to the process, right? And so I think it's just you have to think very carefully about the business needs and the cost, right? And so you can definitely have a quality product without like a formally labeled ISO 1345 quality system in place. They're not, it's not a prerequisite.
That's really cool. So you rolled your own. You just did a first principles quality system for what you felt the company needed to be
Yeah, we just added
good.
little on time and time again. Yeah, and then it, worked pretty well. Never had any recalls, never had any issues.
That's great.
Yeah.
Bindia. George, sorry, did somebody have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to jump in really quick, and so I'm sorry to jump in front of you, India, but like I want to pick Kelvin's insights were really, really good. And I just wanted to piggyback and say, most of you that are in BioTools Innovator are either a scientist or an engineer to start with. Inherently in your training, you have quality. It may not be labeled ISO 1345 or 9001, but you wouldn't be building a product without following the principles in your training of experimentation and documentation and those things. So you don't need to be afraid of quality. It gets, you don't have to go all the way to 1345 or 9001 immediately, but you should understand what those concepts are and then take from them what you need for your market and for your product. So yeah.
What did you guys focus on first at your company, Eric?
We take, the little things like lot inspections, like Kelvin was talking about, right? And tracking of your lots and production quantities from your suppliers, right? Doing QCs every time you get in a component from a supplier and documenting those things. And then, setting up a CAPA system if we had an issue that we're seeing from our user base so that we can track it back to a root cause, right? Those sorts of things. And obviously design history files as well, right? We didn't need to go 9001 or 1345 to start, right? But we looked at those guidelines and started building our systems from the ground up so that when it was time to go 1345 and 9001, it wasn't going to be a massive project to go back and rework everything, right? So taking those inherent things that you need to make sure that you're building a good quality product, and then just building that into your day-to-day processes and your culture as well. So
Thanks, Eric. And Bindia.
So I think it's back to the best practices of how you design your product. I think quality has to be baked into it from the very beginning. And it all starts from, again, ground zero, simple systems engineering requirements, right? If you know what your product was going to be used for, and in a lot of the products go through a phased approach, right? You could be starting as an RU, and then eventually you have a roadmap for it becoming an IVD. As long as you did the right due diligence with building the quality into the product from the very beginning, and this could be as simple as design verification or process verification or getting QC in place at the vendor sites when you're receiving your parts, putting some minimal traceability in place that allows you to check those boxes off and ensure that the product is actually meeting its intent. And now you have done that homework, and that becomes your solid foundation on which, if you're going the direction of an IVD product from there, you can either decide, do I want to invest and bring the ISO 13485 in house, or do I go to a CM that already offers it to me? But because you have done the initial work correctly, it really allows you to scale without having to almost go back and invest a lot more time and energy to get the product to the same level so you can pick it up from there. In my experience, if you do not put the right foundation and then try to make this happen, it becomes a big chore. It looks like a very big ask. But if you're thinking from the building blocks from the very beginning of the program on how do you bake quality into your design and the different aspects of it, it's a much smaller lift because you're planning for it and you're executing towards it. And it's a simpler check in process through the development cycle that allows you to get there.
And do you see differences, or what kind of differences do you see in terms of like capital equipment versus reagents versus maybe software? How do you guys think through that?
Uh, so I think it all depends on the company policy. Say it's your IP and you don't want to go out and you want to protect it, then a lot of that becomes capital investment, especially if it's hardware related. So if you're trying to produce instrument, then there is tools and equipment that go with it, which you need to invest and design and verify, validate, and bring them online. So there's cost and capital equipment that goes with it. Similarly, on the reagents, there's manufacturing lines and setups that go behind it. And so again, the question becomes, if you're trying to create a manufacturing setup, then there's capital equipment and cost. Software on the other side, a lot of it could be more of the software lifecycle management and tools that can be put in place that allows you to trace and get to a best practice. How much of that is truly a capital investment? It all depends on what kind of software you're producing and how is the database getting managed around it. Yeah, I think it depends on what your product entails, right? So if it's a sequencer like ours, we touch all of those, right? We have hardware, we have reagents, we have consumables, we have software. So, and for each one of them, there's a different investment that we do in terms of capital equipment and QMS systems that go around it.
Thanks, Bindu. Shri, how about your perspective on that? Do you think through quality in different product categories, and how do you sort of integrate those perspectives?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I can speak on the consumable side. That's predominantly where I've worked on. But yes, depending on the type of product you have, the quality requirements will vary. Especially on the consumable side, has been pointed out, everything from the raw materials that you bring in to how you manufacture these consumable products in your plant. So what is needed to control the right process parameters, and then what the final outlook, which is the critical quality attribute of your product, looks like. All those three pieces tie in to build the right quality management system you need to deliver a quality product at the back end of it. And I'm confident that that is what will apply across different product ranges in its own way. So,
Kelvin, did you use? Oh, so go ahead. Sorry, Bindu.
Yeah, can I jump in there
Yep.
real quick? So one thing that was brought up by Bindya and Shri both, I wanted to kind of piggyback on, which is as a cohort company, most of you have very limited resources. You're not going to be able to build out a very large manufacturing facility and everything else that goes along with it that's going to meet the factory requirements for ISO 13485. You can utilize contract manufacturers to help you in that process. So don't think that you have to build this from scratch on your own. There are a lot of groups out there that can assist you with this. The most important thing as a cohort company with very limited resources is having a plan. It's like, when I get to this stage, this is where I'm going to reach to this contract manufacturer. And doing, having that is much more important than making the actual investment, on day one in those areas because you're not going to have the resources to make those investments.
Yeah, great point, Eric. I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to add on to what Eric just said, right? Every single program, doesn't matter whether it's a small company or a big company, or in which phase of the company you are, a decision making process is what is needed, right? Make versus buy. Should I make this in house, or should I go either buy something that's available out there or go get a service that allows me to achieve the need? So that ROI calculation is really the key approach and thought process that every program needs to go through. And the more often you do it, the better it is, because now you are not making a wrong decision, whether it means big investments. And if you are making that decision, you have put the right thought process and went behind it. And it could be the right direction for the company. It might not have been the case a year ago, but the need has changed, the market has changed, and you have a lot more funding than what you were initially hoping for. So making that decision making process a regular aspect of your journey, I think really enables us to pick the right direction and not overdo it, but at the same time invest in the areas that will really allow you to be successful in whatever the final form of your product is.
Thanks, Bindia. Any other comments on the quality processes there? Okay. So let's talk about back to you, Bindia. What are the core requirements by stage, like certifications, V&V, verification validation tests, success criteria? How do you apply and think through these in terms of timing and stage of development?
So I think just breaking it out into simple PDP cycles, right? So you have what we call a concept phase of a program, and then development, and then pilot, and sustaining, and end of life. So in the concept phase, it's more in terms of what are the user needs, design inputs, and requirements, right? If we spend good solid amount of time thinking through that aspect, it really allows us to architect the right product, right? You will understand where you're putting the risk in the product, whether it is a specific ecosystem, a specific discipline, or a couple of disciplines, could be, say, fluidics and optics. And by knowing that ahead of the program, you will decide what needs to come in development from de-risking, right? So this is where you'll think about, what does my prototype look like? How do I de-risk certain elements sooner than later? And with it, now you're building the design maturity that's required for you to know that are you going in the right direction and the product meeting the need. And with that prototype, then now you're ready to send it out to your customer to get that initial feedback. And the feedback needs to be beyond just performance of the product. This needs to be the workflows, the user experience, the reliability and robustness, and how the customer really uses the product. You get that feedback into the prototype phase, and you translate that feedback into, do you make any changes to the direction you're marching towards? And if that's required, then now you make a change and you get that next version of the prototype out. So one thing I found to be extremely valuable is short learning cycles of prototypes. So you don't want to make your prototype so complex that it takes you years to make that one prototype. You want to think about a baseline prototype on which you can get more and more features added more rapidly. And that quicker learning cycles really allow you to fail fast, de-risk the product sooner, and from it, you're getting that much closer to what that final product looks like. And even the customer feedback, the first feedback should come when you're in the very initial phases of your prototype, so you have the opportunity to make changes. You don't want to wait for too long, so now you are stuck in terms of the changes you can make based on that customer feedback. And then through each of these development cycles, you're thinking about, are you bringing your manufacturing partners along? Are you bringing your quality partners along? And this really what allows you to scale and then launch the product when you're getting to the back end. If you don't work on all elements of that commercial launch requirement through the PDP cycle, then you end up struggling on the back end, because now it's a massive effort and lift that you did not plan for, and it becomes a time issue.
Interesting. So when do you think is the right time for a company to think about a quality consultant, or just kind of like what Kelvin did, managing it themselves and just figuring out what worked for them and was needed?
I would say it's pretty much in your requirement phase. In your requirement, you're defining what is the quality of the product, right? Which are the aspects of it that you need? And in the process, you'll understand, do you have gaps with how you can deliver it? Or do you feel that you have enough tools and the right resources who are capable of providing those solutions along the way? If you know upfront that you have a gap in a very specific area, then bringing the consultant will allow you to understand what those next steps are, and you can incorporate that into your development cycle.
Yeah. Kelvin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess one thing we haven't talked a whole lot about is that, the earlier, and I think Bindia kind of touched upon this, right? A lot of these kind of quality manufacturing decisions, the earlier you can think about it and fold it into your technical development, even at concept stage, the smoother the back end is going to be, right? And so I think one mistake that a lot of companies, people can make is, okay, let's just get this prototype or this first market thing out the door. Even if the manufacturing is very tedious, we'll clean it up later. We'll scale it later, right? And if you lay that technical foundation with a process that's very hard to scale or very hard to track or intrinsically kind of variable, and going back to re-engineering later can be, in the best case, challenging, sometimes impossible, because now you've built this whole foundation and you got to redo everything. It makes it really, really tricky, right? So like early on when we were making our first kits, we were using a very small batch process where you could make 50 of our little things at a time, right? And then so we were launching our first kit. We decided, hey, you know what? We have to, like, long term, we need to be able to make millions of these, right? So one part of this project is going to be, hey, making the kit and the chemistry to do these extractions and do the sequencing. But another product is we're going to redo our whole manufacturing process, right? From our prototype where we're doing batch scale of 50 at a time, right? Where it's costing $2 or $3 to make each of these things. And we're going to make this new process where we can do it on a large roll-to-roll process where we can make, hundreds of thousands at a time and potentially millions, right? And so now we're going to also pilot this new manufacturing process. And then at the same time, we're also going to look at different vendors, right? We're going to try to pick three different vendors that we're going to pilot to do the critical parts of this, right? I think we're going to keep this critical part in-house. And there's other parts where we're going to have to run sporadically and we don't want to buy special equipment. We're going to find other vendors, right? And these vendors, because even though we're not ISO certified, I don't want to have to recertify these vendors. So I'm going to, the three that we pilot, we're going to make sure they're ISO certified with the things that we need so that later on, when I do care about this, I don't have to find new vendors again. Right? I can stick with the same vendors I've been using for 10 years, right? And so I think that's a case where, like, when you think strategically about it, you can lay a better foundation so that you're not going to revisit work over and over and over again, right? But I think just like anything, there's some balance, right? If you try to strategically plan everything down to a T, you can just get paralyzed by doing this analysis and not go anywhere, right? And so I think that's where, like, especially with small startup, there's always risk. There's always risk, right? And there's some risk you just live with. And then the big risk you try to tackle off and plan strategically. And then, as founders, you try to, in the earliest team, you just try to weigh those and balance those and try to take off the biggest risk, most critical strategic things first. And some of it, you just let it fly. It's all for another day. But that's where the art comes in, trying to figure out which ones you let fly and which ones you plan.
Thanks,
Yeah, I
Calvin.
think maybe to add to that, right? The concept of requirements is not only done in the very beginning of the program, right? It's good practice to revisit your key requirements as you're going through a development cycle, because industry evolves around you. What you thought was a relevant requirement in the beginning of the program, say 5 years ago, might not be relevant because things have changed around it. So just the thought process of revisiting the requirements and doing it more in a light lift but structured fashion will ensure that you're not off track. And then you have to go back and fundamentally redesign the direction that your company is going, or even the product.
All right. Well, that puts us pretty close to time, but I have one final question just for the group, if you have an answer. But if I'm a founder and I've never really operated within a quality managed environment system before, and I don't really know what it looks like. I mean, you get the standards and they just kind of tell you what has to be done, but they don't tell you how to do any of it. um, but do you guys have any resources if I want to go learn more about good verification, validation, traceability between product requirements, user needs, design inputs, kind of some of those fundamental things we've been talking about, the traceability. Are there any resources that you guys use or would share that could be helpful?
I have found the NASA Handbook for Systems Engineering as a really good starting point, because it talks about all aspects of system engineering and data input, output, and QMS is a nice part of it. So
NASA for the win. All
I mean,
right.
there are others too, Jim.
yeah.
Even within the specialty chemicals industry space, where they have kind of tried to engineer in product development with a lot of quality by design inputs right from the get-go, right? And I'm happy to share some of those literature as well.
Okay. Yeah. If you have some links you can share afterwards, we can share those with the cohort as well.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, we will stop our live stream. Thanks for joining today if you were watching online. But if you're in the cohort or on this